Hi, everyone. Kelly here, and today I have Lyndi Knox from Knox Clarinet Studio. Lyndi and I are going to be chatting about how she restructured her studio, made some updates so that she could confidently attract more ideal students to the studio. So before we go any further, Lyndi, as always, I'll have you jump in. Tell us a little bit more about your studio and your background and what you provide to your students.
Yeah, for sure. So I am a clarinet teacher in the Tacoma, Washington area. I work with students from beginners through advanced high school. I graduated from Ohio State with my master's in 2020 and tried to kick off my studio during the pandemic, which was a little interesting. But I'm pleased to say we've seen a lot of growth since then. It's been really awesome to get to work with a variety of students. I had a couple students this past term who just did their very first ever recital at our spring recital. And I have some now that have been with me for a couple years, which is so cool to see all of their growth at different areas. But I think what I really specialize in my studio is helping students build their confidence, empower them to figure out how to learn and how to practice and translate that beyond just the clarinet, because these skills can really go to anything that they're working on. But yeah, I really work a lot on building confidence and building that individual, like, I can figure it out attitude.
That's
I've also
awesome.
just, yeah, I've also discovered, I think, niched in on my ideal student a little bit more. And I work really well with those students who I think maybe start off a little less confident. I've also realized I have a lot of students who are neurodivergent on some spectrum, and I think I work really well and mesh well with them as well. And so just like finding a way that works for them, and maybe previously other teachers haven't understood that, and being able, I think it takes a lot of creativity, and I appreciate that from my end of like, how do I approach you best and how do we make this work for you?
That's awesome. And it's really great to have this like welcoming, inclusive studio. I know how much your students appreciate that. But also your students are playing at a high level. You've got kids in youth orchestra. So like you're working on this confidence and then it is translating to
Yeah.
other areas, including in their playing that like they're finding that confidence enough to go take auditions and do cool big things. And it's awesome.
Yeah.
So let's back up a little bit. I know you and I have known
Sure.
each other for a little over a year. We were kind of social media pals for a while before we actually started working together, which is awesome. But we'll start maybe at like end of the summer into fall.
Yeah.
At that time, what was happening in your studio? What did things look like? And maybe what were some of the things that were frustrating you a little bit?
Yeah. I remember coming to you being frustrated and a little overwhelmed. It
Mm.
was, I think, my first summer kind of heading into with a bit of a larger studio. I guess, to give some context, I had previously been working kind of a day job, and over that year was when I had stopped that day job and really wanted to focus on not only studio but also some other music jobs I'd done, but solely be
Mm-hmm.
financially supported by music.
Sure.
And summer kind of blindsided me. I didn't prep my students well enough, and I had a lot leave. And then I was grateful to have quite a few join over the summer, and then a lot of them didn't stay. So I had just a lot of up and down. So I came into August. I was anticipating, okay, all of these new students are going to come with me, and these old students
Mm.
are all going to come back, and I'm going to have this much bigger studio. And that didn't really happen. So I was feeling very stressed, and I remember just kind of hitting a point of real frustration, and
Mm.
maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I should just go, do an admin job or something that's more secure. I feel like I'm putting a lot into this and not getting the return that I need.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I remember just coming into the fall with a real sense of frustration, and not the security that I wanted, and uncertainty. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. And when things are unstable like that too, it's not just frustrating because you're looking at your bank account and it's stressful, but also like
Yeah.
it does take an emotional toll on you
Yeah.
when even your roster isn't stable because you put a lot of heart and soul into your students. So you're just talking about all the things that you work with them on and how proud of you, how proud of them you are, and all the things that you want them to achieve and find in their playing and in their personal lives. But when you're working on that development and then it is rocky, it's hard to see their long-term growth and success. It's hard to feel
Yeah.
fulfilled by that teaching too. So it's exhausting. And I think that's probably
Yes.
a great summary of how we were feeling in September was like tired
Yeah.
and frustrated.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, you also had some ideas. We had some changes we wanted to make. So like
Yeah.
moving to 45-minute lessons, for example. Talk a little bit about some of the things that you were hoping to see in the studio, but maybe we were a little nervous to make some changes or to try new things.
Yeah. So I had planned on, and I did, raise my rates. Since raised them since then too, but I raised my rates. And This was also when I went to a more flat rate system, although I don't think it was the most organized, but we can get into that later. I didn't have the best idea how to structure it, but I had moved to a more flat rate idea of tuition. And then, like you mentioned, the biggest thing was I was moving all of my students to 45-minute or 60 minutes when I'd previously done 30 minutes and 60 minutes. And that was really because I just never liked 30-minute lessons. I did them for a couple of years. I always felt like they were very short. And I think also part of what I wanted to attract was these, not serious in the sense of only the students that can play the Mozart concerto, but serious in the sense that students who really wanted to be there and were passionate about it. And I felt like a slightly longer lesson and a higher price point also attracts that. So I was like, maybe we'll weed out some that are just like, sure, I want a fun 30-minute activity every week.
Yeah.
That's great, but I don't think I'm really necessarily the teacher for that. I want you to be invested in it.
Absolutely.
So I think that was the biggest changes, was changing my rates, changing the lesson times. I think I'd also planned to build in some time off, which I had not done before. So like actually taking a break at winter break and not losing money on it, which was great.
Yes. Well, it's stressful. Like you hit December and like it's the holiday season. There's all these other expenses that come up. You might want to be buying gifts. You might want to take time off. You might even want to travel to see family. But then also we lose half of our income because we're only teaching 2, maybe 3 weeks in that month. And it all just kind of falls apart at the seams. It's really stressful. So you were looking at the fall. We had these ideas for changes. We kind of made some of them. I think when we met and started talking about planning, organization was such a big pain point around this, that we had some of these changes made or we had some things in mind, but the organization of how to actually structure this in the policies and then communicating it to everyone so they were all on the same page and understanding was really important. So we'll kind of jump back to that September-ish time again. Right away when we started working together, what are some of the actions that you took in your studio that had a really fast result for your growth or for your policy changes?
Yeah, I think restructuring my policies to be, I didn't change a whole lot of them, honestly, but I think I made them into a much more sufficient document, made them just clearer. I had before like a studio contract and it was pretty lengthy. I don't think people were reading all the way through it. So I made it more, it was like, now it's like 1 to 2 pages. There's like little headers. I feel like it's much more clear and concise. And the biggest thing with new students now is that I present that to them right away. Whereas before I didn't quite know how to do that the best. I think just making that more concise. It's on my website now. It's like just an easier, quick document I can send out. And as far as communication as well, just having templates of how I communicate with people and having that be a lot more streamlined. I feel like I used to just spend so much time just like writing out every single email. And now it's like the tuition email, if you miss tuition, is the same every month. I'm not going to spend time writing it. I'm going to copy and paste it, or a studio policy reminder. I think also in that in communication, one of the biggest things I learned from you early on was to call them instead of text or email them. And that's made a huge difference. Was definitely a little bit of a fear thing at first.
You're not alone in that at all, for sure. It's really
to pick up the phone. But I did discover that makes such a difference with, it's just, I think you've said it before many times, but just them getting to hear my tone of voice and me getting to hear that, it just diffuses things so much more quickly. I always remember nobody's a kind reader. It's so true. So I think that piece of communication has really helped as well. Where if something comes up, just either talking in person or talking on the phone, I feel like issues get resolved much faster.
Absolutely. Well, and to the point of no one is a kind reader, what happens a lot of the time too, especially when we're trying to make big policy changes or explain new policy changes and updates that we're making, it is kind of a complicated thing, and people are skimming it. They're not reading it. Not only are they
Yes.
implying whatever their stress is to the implied tone of voice in the writing, but then also it's not always 100% clear at the beginning how we got here, why those changes are happening.
Yeah.
So having conversations face to face or picking up the phone also means that we can get through all the questions right away, that everything can get answered immediately. So that's awesome. Now, in the policy updates, I know tuition was a really, really big one, and that's how
Yeah.
we also built in time off and all of that. But having those new policies in place, kind of refining the policies that you had already, and then also having the conversations up front, so not just expecting them to read it. What has that done for the students that you're working with, for the new inbound students and incoming students? How does that change your working relationship with them?
Yeah. I feel like I've had much less issues with policy things. I feel like the biggest one that used to come up was cancellations and how I handled that. I think I was way too wishy-washy and too lenient with people. I would just let them reschedule or let them. I kind of shudder now, but I used to, they missed a lesson and then they just didn't have to pay for it, if they let me. And
Sure.
I would just got rid of that quickly, but I used to do that. And so, but I think just doing it up front, it's just like I don't have those issues. Like new student, like they cancel a lesson last minute. I send them a little blurb being like, this won't be made up because of how late we canceled, or maybe it's the first time. I sometimes do, but a lot of times they'll even just tell me like, I know we're canceling late. I know you're not going to make it up, but and they'll just kind of be aware of the policy already, which is so refreshing because I don't have to be the bearer of bad news. A lot of times I get that now. They're just like, we know that this is too late. We're just giving you courtesy notice, but we know it's an hour before and you're not going to reschedule for us. And there's no animosity about it.
Yes.
Same thing with weeks off. I think the newer students that have come in, I recently took a spring break in May, which I think is the first time I ever took a spring break that wasn't like centered around a holiday. So I was a little nervous about doing that. It felt a little different than when I say I'm taking a break around Christmas time when most people are also on break. But I had been really nervous how people were going to react, and I had zero reactions. People were just like, okay, cool, see you in 2 weeks. And it was just so easy because I think I'd prepped that in the policy. I, of course, reiterated again. I put a note from the policy and said, you're not being billed for this week. This is a week scheduled in to take off. And nobody had any questions. And it was so refreshing because I was really nervous for the reactions I was going to get, but I didn't get any.
Well, and then taking that space means when you come back, you're refreshed. You're a better teacher.
Yes.
You're like back on your A game because you've had some time to rest and recuperate, and you're not even feeling like you need to check your email the whole time. Like you actually get that space and that distance from the studio. That's a good thing. It doesn't make you less of a teacher for needing that space. I think it actually really helps us to perform at our optimum performance as an instructor. That's awesome. And these are all really good changes. I want to talk a little bit about some of the numbers, if that's okay, because we're talking about the studio growth. We made a lot of progress, especially in revenue, without having to be teaching a lot more hours because of these changes, because we went to the flat rate and because we, also implemented some longer lessons. So when we first started working together in the fall, I think we had, did we say about 6 students on a regular basis that were coming? Okay. What does the studio look like right now?
Right now I have about 10 students. And yeah, I think I teach about 8 hours a week or so. I will say also another thing I restructured is just being more strict on the teaching times too. So in a way, I think I'm teaching slightly more hours, but it kind of feels like less because I've gotten a lot more confident in setting boundaries around this is the day that I'm going in here. This is the day I'm teaching online. I used to just like accommodate people and be like, sure, I'll do this random lesson. And I was driving around all the time or popping on my computer at random times. And now it's like, it's more hours, but it's quite set. So generally now I teach basically Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And that might change in the future as I get more students, but it works really well. My longest evenings on Thursdays, and I have like an online evening on Tuesdays, and then kind of a more mixed on Wednesdays. And it's a lot nicer and it's a lot more consistent. And then when I get new students, I can just tell them that, like, if you want online, here's the time. If you want in person, here's the time. And that's just what it is.
That's awesome. Well, and I think a big change in your studio too has been not only like the structure, we're talking a lot about organization and kind of how we restructured things, but in that restructure, by setting the boundaries, I think it's also more clear for your students what their expectations are. So as you're heading into summer,
Yeah.
for example, this year, like before we hit recording on this, you were talking about how your students were asking, like, are summer lessons expected? And you were able to confidently affirm, like, yes, we are going to continue all summer. And now we're not going to see that dip. We're already seeing that students
Yes.
are committed for the summer and they have goals. How does
Mm-hmm.
that feel when you compare it to last year when there was a lot of ups and downs and lack of predictability?
Yeah, it feels so much better, and so much more stable. And yeah, it feels like I think you said at the beginning, it feels much more like I can show up better for my students because I'm not carrying around that stress.
Yeah.
Things like in our personal life, like we're moving in a few weeks, and it's so nice to not have additional stress of trying to, figure out like extra work things because I don't know what's happening with my students. It's like I feel like things are fairly stable. I can kind of focus, and have time devoted to like personal things like, okay, we've got to back up an apartment, and that takes a lot of time and energy too.
It does.
So,
Well, and you have other things on your plate. I mean, you're adjunct to 2 different universities. It's not like
yes.
the studio is the only thing that you're focusing on. So you
Yeah.
are spread a little thin, and it's important that
Yes.
we can compact all that time and be really, really efficient.
Yes.
That's awesome. Now, the studio growth, revenue wise, if you want to just kind of quickly touch on numbers, we've more than doubled the studio revenue through less than twice the number of hours in teaching. We went from, maybe like 4 or 5 hours a week of teaching to 8, we said, but the studio revenue is doubled without having to grow significantly.
Yeah.
What contributes to that?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is the flat rate tuition. Slightly longer lessons helps as well, but yeah, the tuition is flat rate. It's set. There's a price, a monthly tuition for 45-minute, a monthly tuition for 60-minute. Majority of my students are in 45-minute, but I think it's really nice to kind of save that 60-minute slot for the more serious students or adult students that have come in, and then as they advance, I can kind of also encourage them to move up to that 60-minute. Like I have a couple students in mind for next year that I'm gonna kind of hopefully be like, hey, you're getting really serious, like, but I think I got this from you as well. We're running out of time to do everything in lessons. Like, let's add a little bit more time.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, because before I was making less for sure, but it was also quite up and down. And now it tends to be a lot more stable. I know what I'm making every month. I know when it's going to come in. That's also a thing I don't think we talked about yet, but I used to collect payment. I think like a lot of teachers do when they're starting out. And I guess there's nothing wrong with this if it doesn't bother you, but it didn't work well for me. I used to do like cash check, Venmo, Zelle, PayPal, like all of them. And it was just kind of a mess. And I felt like I was constantly like having to track down the last few throughout the month, or they didn't bring the check to the first lesson, so I'd wait for the second. That's stressful income-wise as well. So now I do everything through Duet Partner and Stripe, and the majority of my students are on auto pay. I have a few that, for whatever reasons, didn't want to be, but they know the expectation that they still have to pay on the first, and they tend to be good about it. So all my income comes in at one point at the beginning of the month, which is so nice.
It takes up so much headspace when you are trying to, and I think more than we realize when we're in that situation, when you have to go be like, tracking down the payments and communicating, but then also looking at your spreadsheet and figuring out who hasn't paid you, and you're worried about like, are they going to pay you? Are they going to continue this month? Am I going to end up teaching a lesson that's not paid for? How do I talk to them about that? All of that worry and problem solving and all that extra communication absolutely bleeds into your lessons, and it creates so much more mental strain than having things on auto pay where the money just shows up every month and we can separate the money and the music so that when you're teaching, you're just teaching. You're not trying to figure out all the admin stuff on the side too. That's awesome.
For sure. Yeah. And I think in that note too, like if there ever is an issue, like this happened this last month, I had a couple payments not go through for whatever reason, and it was just little things like they put in the wrong card number or whatnot. But I think it's also so much easier because then I can just call said parent and be like, hey, this happened. And I don't have to do it in the lesson in front of the student because that also feels so awkward. And I think that used to happen before, like I had to catch the parent at the end of the lesson and the student's right there, and it just feels very weird. So instead it's so much nicer just to go direct to parent or caregiver, whoever is paying for lessons,
Yeah.
and be able to be direct with them and students not involved. And I like that about Duet Partner as well, that the student's view doesn't show any of the money and just the parent's view does. So it feels separate in
Yep.
that way too.
Yeah, especially because, when we're having these conversations, like if you catch mom or dad off guard at the end of the lesson, like they might be a little flustered, and sometimes it
Yeah.
can kind of break rapport, like it bleeds over to the next lesson. Again, it's extra mental strain, it's extra time and
Yeah.
energy, and that's what you're thinking about during the lesson is, okay, I gotta like save 2 minutes because I gotta I gotta have this conversation quick with mom and dad. And it takes away from your students' growth and success in that relationship. So it's
Yeah.
a great change. Now, also in the studio growth, okay, we talked about your revenue's grown, which is awesome. The number of hours hasn't grown significantly, but one of the things that has been a big change in your studio planning and revenue sources is your rate increased a lot. Like we're talking about a jump, if it's okay for me to share, from
Yeah.
like $50 an hour, which not a livable hourly rate in Tacoma for what we're trying to do, to
No.
now 70 plus an hour
Yeah.
for, obviously on the flat rate too. But when you tell a new student that rate, what does that feel like when they just agree to that rate and they're excited to pay you that amount?
It's always still, I think, a little surprising in a way, because I mean, there's always still a little bit of fear, but it's been so nice to see more students just, not even blink an eye. And at the same time, I think I've had to learn to accept when a couple of them said, oh, that is too much for us. And then it's like, it's either they're not maybe an ideal student for me, or like one thing I have been able to do a little bit in the studio is like, if it's a student I really believe in, offer them a scholarship or offer them something else, which I never would have been able to do before. But because I have the students that can paying more, and
Yes.
then sometimes I have a little more flexibility. I don't have the means to do that a lot yet, and I don't publicize it, but I did have one student this past year who family just kind of hit some hard times, and single mom, and they'd been with me for a while, and I was able to offer them like a half scholarship for a few months, and then they returned to full tuition right away, and they were so grateful for it, and it was so nice to be able to provide that. And that's something I would love to keep doing, and I've always wanted to do, but I never had the structure in place to do. And you can't do that if you're like, bleeding and not making enough to live on to begin with.
Absolutely. And this is something I think that musicians struggle with in general. If I paint very broad strokes here, that we do this for the love of the music and for the love of our students primarily. And so asking for more money, or really focusing on the revenue and the numbers, can be scary and uncomfortable, right? So when we have the ability to offer a scholarship and to help students, it fulfills that part of us, that very altruistic purpose that we want to be supporting everyone. And there's organizations we can work with to make some of these things happen too, but there's not endless funding to make this happen for students. So by able to do, when we're able to do it in-house, it just means that we can have more of an impact on our local community. We can have more of an impact on the students we want to work with. And it's very fulfilling and exciting.
For
That's
sure.
awesome. So let's say someone's trying to, they're watching this video because they're trying to figure out, is outside the box the right system for me to use? Is this a good fit? And what could this do for my studio? What would it feel like to be a part of this program? Maybe what are some things that you would recommend to them, or some things that you've learned in the program and about your studio that you'd want to share? Tips, tricks, any advice, things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I know we focus a lot on organization, and I feel like that seems like kind of a surface level thing. But like you said, I feel like if I just think back to a year ago, like the brain space that things would take up, like at the end of the month, getting invoices sent out, or like if somebody's going to be gone, rescheduling their lesson, or like I'm going to be gone, shuffling around lessons, and how much easier all of that has gotten. It's like, it seems like a small thing, but it's not a small thing, because it's just like, it's opened me up to so much more time to focus on the important stuff. I think that's something I've really gained. I guess also on the organization and communication front, I've had so much more success this year getting into schools, because I learned the right strategy to approach band directors of how to get into their schools, and how to make kind of a mutually beneficial agreement. And that's been so cool. I've seen a few students from it. It hasn't been humongous, but I think also the long-term relationships I've built is going to continue to expand. And I feel like now I have a bigger network of teachers to draw from, like when I have ideas to bounce off of them. And I feel like when they do have students now, they think of me. And that's really, really cool. And also, like you said, like an altruistic is also just a way of giving back. Even if I don't get a student from them, volunteering a few hours to go help out some clarinets, and maybe I help them get over the break easier and they're less frustrated. Like that feels also good. Even if they don't become my student, it's like, it's a nice thing to see that you can have, if that's all you need from me, then at least I got to have like a little immediate impact, and that's pretty cool as well. So yeah, I mean, it's wild to think back a year ago. I feel like it's just in such a different place. Just all the ways I think my confidence has grown as a business owner and as a studio owner. I think before I was even hesitant to like use those words. I think that's the thing as well. Like I would shyly say, I teach lessons, and it's like, no, I run a studio. Then this is a business, and like being able to say that more confidently. And I feel like also that way when families come to me about lessons, I can kind of exude that energy that is different than like, yeah, you could probably get a cheaper rate from a high schooler teaching lessons, but here's what I offer that's different. And I feel much more confident saying that. And selling, I don't like the word selling, but here's what I have to offer. And like being confident that I know it's unique, and has things like I do things now, like I do studio classes, I do recitals. And I know a number of teachers do those, but I didn't have that growing up, and I don't know a ton around here that do it. I think it's still somewhat more rare. So I wish everybody would do it, but I do feel like that's still somewhat more unique. And I guess, if people are considering that, that's what I've gained from it, is just a lot more confidence. And if I could total up the hours every month that are not wasted on stress and paperwork and communication, it's tremendous, I think. And just the way I can see, I feel like I'm still just getting started. Like, I guess this was my maybe second full year of doing studio, but I feel like this was kind of the first year that things maybe really took off and got more set in place. And now I feel like I know how to handle things as they expand. And that feels really good.
That's awesome. That is awesome. And over the last year too, or not the last year, maybe like 8-ish months that we've, kind of been working together, in that period, you're averaging about one new student per month when we look at the numbers, which is feeling more predictable. And we've got these relationships built. But I want to highlight at the beginning, we talked about the ideal student.
Yeah.
What does that mean for you? And when you say you're attracting more ideal students, can you describe not necessarily what your ideal student is? You don't have to define it if you don't want to, but just talking about what makes for a stronger relationship and why that's happening, and why you feel like it's happening more predictably now. Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it goes back to kind of what I was just touching on. Like when I go to a consultation now, which is also much more organized, I have kind of a general script that I go through, but I think I've kind of maybe more discovered my voice and what is important to me to tell to a student. And I think approaching it from this way of, I'm making sure that we're a match for one another. Whereas I think before and it's hard when you're first starting, because I know that I just approached like, I want to get any student that approaches me, because, you want that income, you want to make this sustainable. But I think now I feel much more confident, and like, if you don't feel like this is a good fit, then it's not like, I don't feel like I'm selling, because I feel like I'm like just presenting. And if you think this is good and I think this is good, then it'll be a good relation. I think that starts it on the right foot. But yeah, I think I've just clarified my voice, and I think I've clarified more what I offer as a teacher. I think before I was kind of like more broad strokes, and I know something we did early on in the program is kind of identifying that ideal student and identifying what I do. And it was interesting. It's like, as much as it was about who I want to work with, I think it was also a lot about who I am and what I feel I value the most. And I think being more aware of that, then I pass that on. And then, like I said, if it's not a good fit, then it's not a good fit. But I feel like it's much more clear to the consumer, if you will. That sounds very salesy, but to the family or whoever I'm talking to, it's clear what they're going to get in working with me. It's not like, okay, we'll try a lesson. And I feel like I can't speak for them, but I feel more confident that generally they know coming into the first lesson what they're going to expect after meeting me.
Well, and when those expectations are set, then a student that in a different scenario, or even if they joined the studio a year before, if the policies weren't as clear, if the process wasn't as clear, as if the expectations weren't outlined clear enough, they may not have been an ideal student. They may have paid late. They may have been sporadic in their attendance. They might have canceled all the time. They may have been a student that was causing a little bit of that stress.
Yeah.
But when you outline all those expectations early, when you have those conversations face to face and you allow them space to get all their questions answered, we're on the same page, we're operating as a team. Sometimes an ideal student isn't just like personality traits or goals of a student, but it's also because we're aligned on policies and how we operate together as a team going forward. Now this is an ideal fit. And we have some influence over that through how we organize our onboarding process and our enrollment process. So
Yeah.
as you found this, I think the stability is increasing because students are in agreement on the stability.
Yeah. And I think on that too, I've definitely learned it's not only the student, it's also the family that has to kind of mesh well. And I have learned there is some leeway. I won't get too much into detail, but I had a family who's been with me for a couple of years who, when I changed a lot of things in the fall, created a lot of tension initially. And we talked through it and it was a little stressful. But they've since gotten on board and been fine ever since. So I do think it was like good for me to learn as well that even if there is, and I think it was because they'd come from a more lenient policy, it was a little jarring for them. I can see from their side being like, wow, you're changing things a lot. This is a lot stricter. I don't know if I like it.
Right.
But, through discussion with them, and again, that was face to face. I think that made a big difference. I think they could hear where I was coming from. And I wasn't being mean about it, but I also was setting boundaries of this is how it's going to be. And they met me there and they've been great. So I think there is definitely room for people to kind of get on board. But I also think, I've learned that it does make a difference. I've had some students come in for a bit who I think the student's great, but the family really lacks communication or is really kind of flaky. And that just doesn't work either. So there's sometimes that can change. And then there's sometimes I've learned that if I see red flags with the family right away, that's probably going to cause me unnecessary stress as well, even if I really love the student and maybe isn't the greatest fit together.
Absolutely. And seeing this transformation in your studio and also personally, as we found this confidence and as you've identified your voice and have created more boundaries, it's been really exciting. And I know as we're talking about this growth over, basically a school year for you in the studio, there's so many incredible things that have happened in the last few months, and also looking forward to summer and fall. We were doing a little bit of planning ahead of our recording today, and I'm just so excited about everything that you have in the works and what's coming next for your studio. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
It's been a really great ride, and I'm excited to see what happens next for you.
Thank you. I so appreciate it. It's been great to work with you and all that you've offered.
Thank you. Maybe as kind of a final thought, if anyone is interested in your studio and they're kind of excited about what you're working on or they want to see a little bit more, where can people find you on the internet if they want to check out what Knox Studio is up to?
For sure. Yeah. So I'm on Instagram at Knox Clarinet Studio, KNOX. And website is the same address, www.knoxclarinetstudio.com. I have been meaning to get a blog going up on there, so maybe that'll be one of my summer goals.
Nice.
To get some of that up there for people to see and get a little more of taste of what I do. But yeah, you can find me on there. I'm fairly active, at least in stories on Instagram, posting kind of my day to day and highlighting my students. And so yeah.
That's awesome. Lyndi, thank you so much for sharing your journey and how you got here and the mechanics of what the studio has been doing over the last few months. I think this is going to be really helpful for anyone that listens. So I appreciate your time and for you just sharing so openly and so freely. And again, congratulations. It's been an honor working with you. And I'm just so proud of everything you continue to do at the studio. Thank you.
Thank you so much.